One winter night in a quiet mountain town, a police officer followed a strange call to an empty bus stop. What he found inside an abandoned backpack would change 3 lives forever. A young German shepherd puppy sitting perfectly still in the snow. Not crying, not barking, just waiting for someone who promised to come back. This is not just a rescue story. It is a story about loyalty that refuses to freeze, about a child who loved so deeply he let go, and about a man who never meant to become a home, but did. If you believe in second chances, in miracles, in the power of kindness, stay with us. And before we begin, tell us where you are watching from today. Leave your city and country in the comments. We want to know who is sharing this moment with us. Cedar Ridge was the kind of mountain town winter did not visit. Winter ruled it. By late December, the streets moved in whispers, every rooftop buried beneath white drifts like old bones under a shroud, every porch light glowing as if afraid of the dark itself. The air smelled of pine, cold iron, and something older, the memory of storms that had come and never truly left. On Maple Street, the wind curved around the abandoned brick diner and slipped down toward the bus stop, where a single yellow street lamp flickered as though counting the seconds until morning. Officer Nolan Hayes, 41, had just finished a long patrol on the upper switchbacks when the call came in. Possible abandoned property, bus stop, Maple and 3rd. Reporting party claims something inside is moving. Nolan was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose frame still carried the weight of years in uniform. His face was narrow and weathered, faint scar cutting his right eyebrow. A gift from a winter pursuit 5 years earlier when a drunk driver lost control on Black Pine Pass. His eyes were a winter blue, steady, patient, but permanently shadowed by what he had learned about how quickly things could break. He spoke little, listened more, and had a habit of removing his gloves before touching anything fragile, as if skin itself might understand pain better. He slowed the cruiser as he reached Maple Street. Snow fell sideways, heavy and relentless, turning the town into a painting someone kept erasing and repainting every few minutes. The diner windows were dark. The hardware store across the road had already closed for the storm. Only the bus stop remained lit, the yellow bulb trembling against the wind. Nolan parked, stepped out, and the cold struck him full in the chest, the kind that burned before it numbed. His boots crunched through ice as he crossed the street. He saw it immediately, a school backpack resting on the wooden bench beneath the shelter roof, dark blue canvas dusted with white, one strap hanging loose, the zipper pulled halfway open. At first it looked like nothing, just another forgotten thing in a town full of forgotten things. Then the backpack shifted. Nolan stopped. Something inside the bag was breathing. He approached slowly, every instinct trained to avoid sudden movement. As he crouched, the wind peeled back the canvas just enough for him to see the face inside. A German shepherd puppy, perhaps 5 or 6 months old, black and tan coat matted with snow, ears half-folded with youth, too large for her narrow skull. Her body was tightly curled, ribs faint beneath the fur. Her eyes were wide open, not frightened, not aggressive, only fixed on the road beyond the glass wall of the shelter, as if she were waiting for something that had promised to come back. She did not bark, she did not growl, she did not move. The temperature hovered near 0. Nolan saw at once that the tips of her paws were red, cracked, trembling from the cold. "Hey," he said softly, removing his glove. "Hey there." The puppy's gaze flicked to him for half a second, then returned to the road. Nolan had worked 20 years in law enforcement. He had pulled children from wreckage. He had lifted bodies from snowbanks. He had seen fear, rage, grief, and the 1,000 shapes of despair. But the stillness of that animal, The discipline of her waiting struck him in a place no training had ever reached. Inside the side pocket of the backpack, he felt something stiff. Paper. He drew it out carefully, unfolding it with hands that no longer felt the cold. The handwriting was uneven, the strokes pressed hard, as if the writer were afraid the words might blow away. "Her name is Luma. Please don't be angry. I had no other choice. Please be kind to her. I will come back. No name, no phone number." Only that last line, written twice, darker the second time. "I will come back." Nolan closed his eyes for a moment, breath fogging the air. He knew, even then, that whoever had written those words was lying, not because they meant to, but because the world had already broken the promise before the ink dried. He reached into the backpack, not touching the dog, but lifting the entire bag into his arms. Luma's body tensed, a small tremor running through her ribs, yet she did not resist. She only pressed deeper into the fabric, nose still aimed at the road, as if even now she feared that if she looked away, she might miss the return. The snow thickened. The wind howled through the empty street. Nolan stood there longer than he should have, holding the backpack against his chest, shielding the animal from the storm with his own body. And in that moment, something ancient inside him recognized something else, just as old. Waiting. He carried Luma to the cruiser, wrapped the backpack in a thermal blanket from the trunk, and placed her gently on the passenger seat. The heater roared to life. The glass fogged. Luma's eyes remained on the road until the engine pulled away from the curb and the bus stop slipped out of view. As they drove, Nolan glanced at her. Her breathing was shallow, controlled, as though she had learned long ago that making noise did not help. "I don't know who left you," he said quietly, "but I do know this. You're not staying out there." Luma blinked once. The storm swallowed the street behind them. The veterinary clinic on Ashford Road smelled of antiseptic and pine cleaner, the kind of place that tried its best to feel warm even when winter refused to cooperate. Snow pressed against the windows like a crowd of silent witnesses as Nolan Hayes carried the backpack through the door. Behind the front desk stood Marilyn Cooper, late 50s, short and sturdy, with silver hair always pulled into the same bun. She had lived in Cedar Ridge her whole life, knew every storm by name, every injury by its story, and spoke with the steady calm of someone who had watched too many small creatures survive impossible things. "What have you got there, officer?" she asked, already moving around the desk. Nolan set the backpack gently on the exam table and unzipped it. The puppy inside did not move. "Found her at the bus stop," Nolan said. "Cold exposure. Possible dehydration." Marilyn leaned in, eyes softening. "Well, I'll be damned." The veterinarian, Dr. Henry Walsh, mid-40s, tall and thin, with spectacles that slid down his nose, entered the room moments later. He examined the puppy's paws, her gums, her ribs, his hands practiced but careful. 5, maybe 6 months, Henry said. "Female, underweight, frost nip on the toes, mild dehydration. She's lucky you found her when you did." Nolan exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. They kept Luma at the clinic for observation, warm fluids, anti-inflammatory medication, bandaged paws. She never barked, never whimpered. Even as the needle slipped into her vein, she only looked toward the door. "She's not scared," Henry said quietly. "She's waiting." Nolan returned every morning before shift and every night after. He brought a blanket from his apartment, sat beside the kennel, read the local paper out loud because silence felt too close to abandonment. After 2 weeks, Henry finally nodded. "She's stable. She'll need limited movement, warmth, consistent meals. Whoever takes her needs to understand she's not normal. Nolan didn't hesitate. I'll take her. His apartment sat above the old hardware store, one bedroom, one window facing the mountains, furniture bought for function, not comfort. It had never held another living thing besides him. That first night home, he spread towels near the heater, set down water, warmed canned food, and unzipped the backpack. Luma crawled out slowly, each movement uncertain, as though the floor itself might disappear if she trusted it too much. She ate, small, careful bites, eyes lifting between mouthfuls to make sure the bowl had not changed its mind. When she finished, she walked past the blanket, past the heater, past Nolan's outstretched hand. She crawled back into the backpack. Nolan sat on the floor for a long time, watching her breathe inside the dark fabric. He turned on the lamp, left the door open, slept on the couch in case she needed him. She did not come. Days passed, then weeks. The snow outside thickened the silence. Nolan learned her habits the way men learn weather patterns. Luma drank at dawn, ate at noon, refused food until he stepped back, then ate again. At night, she remained inside the backpack, eyes open, watching the doorway as if guarding something only she could see. Nolan spoke to her constantly, about nothing, about the roads, about the way winter used to scare him before he learned to trust it, about his father's old dog, Rusty, a mutt who once followed him 3 miles home in a storm because loyalty was easier than logic. Sometimes Luma's ears twitched. Sometimes they didn't. On the 23rd morning, Nolan noticed something strange. At exactly 3:17 p.m., Luma lifted her head, stood, walked to the window. She sat there, unmoving, eyes fixed on Maple Street. He checked his watch. 3:17. The next day, the same. The day after, again. Nolan asked Marilyn. "School bus used to stop on Maple, right?" "Yeah," Marilyn said. "Before the storm closed the district." The realization settled into his chest with terrible clarity. She was not waiting for food. She was waiting for a promise. The ritual continued for weeks. Snowstorms came and went. Luma never missed her moment. Slowly, something else changed. One night, Nolan woke to the faint sound of claws on fabric. He opened his eyes and saw Luma standing at the edge of the hallway, uncertain, torn between the safety of the backpack and the unknown of him. He did not move. She lay down on the rug outside his bedroom. The next night, she placed her chin on his boot while he read. The next, she slept beside the door. Not inside the backpack, near him, not close enough to be hurt, close enough to stay. Nolan's life rearranged itself around her without asking permission. He bought better food, softer blankets, a second lamp so the apartment would never feel abandoned at night. He learned to move slower, to breathe quieter, to leave space for her fear, without demanding she give it up. And then the calls began. School district, social services, missing persons. 6 weeks of winter finally pointed him toward the truth. Ethan Parker, 12 years old, removed from home after domestic violence, disappeared briefly before the storm, entered protective services, had owned a German shepherd puppy named Luma. When Nolan heard the name spoken by someone else for the first time, the room seemed to tilt. Ethan had left Luma at the bus stop believing someone would keep her safe. He had not been wrong. The social worker, Janine Caldwell, mid-30s, careful voice, careful eyes, listened as Nolan explained. "It will take time," she said. "Evaluations, trauma assessments. We don't reunite children and animals quickly." "I understand," Nolan said. Winter did not hurry. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon Janine called. We can arrange a supervised meeting. Nolan looked at Luma by the window. 3:17. I'll be there, he said. That night he placed the backpack by the door, not as a prison, not as a memory, but as a bridge. Luma lay beside it. Snow fell outside. Something inside the house was finally learning how to breathe. Winter did not loosen its grip on Cedar Ridge. It merely learned new ways to tighten it. The mountains stood wrapped in white, like old gods refusing to wake. The roads glinting with ice, even at noon. The sky a permanent sheet of silver cloud. By January, the town had learned to move slowly, carefully, the way people do when every step matters. Inside Nolan Hayes's apartment, the clock became the only thing that moved with confidence. The days were quiet now, quieter than they had ever been before Luma arrived, but not empty. Not anymore. There were bowls to fill, blankets to dry, bandages to replace on healing paws. There were small sounds, the faint scratch of nails on hardwood, the soft sigh of breath settling into sleep, the rustle of newspaper pages in the evening. Luma was recovering, slowly. Her weight crept upward. The redness in her paws faded into pale scars. She could walk the length of the apartment without stumbling now, though Nolan still lifted her when they had to cross icy steps outside. She still did not bark. She did not chase shadows or spin at sudden noises or whine at the door like most dogs her age would. She lived instead in a careful stillness, a quiet discipline that made her seem older than 6 months, older than winter itself. And every afternoon, at exactly 3:17 p.m., she rose. The first time Nolan truly understood it, he had been washing dishes. He heard the faint scrape of her paws across the floor and turned just in time to see her settle in front of the window. Her posture straightened, her ears lifted, her eyes locked onto Maple Street with a focus so sharp it made his chest tighten. He checked his watch. 3:17. The next day, the same, and the next. Snowstorms came and went. School remained closed. The yellow bus never appeared. Yet Luma's body obeyed that hour as if it were written into her bones. Nolan began to sit with her during the ritual, not beside her, that felt like too much, but nearby, his back against the wall, boots crossed, the apartment quiet except for the wind. Sometimes he spoke. "They're not coming today," he would say gently, "but I'm here." She never looked at him, but her tail would flick once. Barely. That was enough. Slow changes came with time. Luma moved her bed from the backpack to the rug near the door, then closer. Then one night she crossed the threshold of Nolan's room and slept with her head near his boots. When he shifted, she lifted her eyes, checked that he remained, and lowered them again. Trust did not arrive loudly. It arrived on its knees. By mid-February, Nolan's phone rang. "Officer Hayes," said Janine Caldwell, "we've completed Ethan's evaluations. Trauma history is significant, but he's stabilizing. His foster placement is holding. He keeps asking about the dog." Nolan's voice came out hoarse. "Luma!" "Yes." There was a pause. Paper rustled. "We can authorize a supervised meeting, 1 hour, next Saturday, here at the center." When Nolan hung up, he did not move for a long time. Luma lay beside the heater, her breathing slow and steady. When he whispered her name, she opened one eye. "I found him," he said. She did not leap, did not bark, did not tremble, but her body shifted, just enough to say the world had tilted. The days before the meeting stretched long. Nolan cleaned the apartment twice, brushed Luma's coat until it shone, replaced the bandage on her paws even though the wounds were nearly healed. The morning of Saturday dawned pale and brittle. Snow fell in fine grains, whispering across the windshield as Nolan drove. Luma rode in the back seat, wrapped in her blanket, eyes fixed ahead. The Child Services building was warm and colorless. Neutral walls, soft lights, toys untouched in corners. Janine greeted them with a practiced calm. Ethan waited inside the visitation room. He was smaller than Nolan had imagined. 12 years old, but thin as a 10-year-old. Brown hair cut unevenly by someone without patience. Hoodie sleeves pulled over his hands. His face carried a strange mix of childhood and exhaustion, the look of a boy who had learned too early that the world was not built for keeping promises. When Luma entered the room, she stopped. Ethan's breath caught. "Mox," he whispered, then corrected himself. "Luma." For a moment they only stared. Then Luma walked forward. She did not run. She did not whine. She pressed her forehead into Ethan's chest as if returning a heartbeat that had been borrowed. Ethan dropped to his knees, his arms locked around her. His shoulders shook. "I'm sorry," he said again and again. "I didn't want to leave you. I thought I'd come back. I thought—" Luma's body trembled, but she did not pull away. She buried her face in the space beneath his chin, the place where she used to sleep. Janine stood near the door, eyes wet. Nolan remained by the wall, unmoving. He had never seen anything like it. Two beings stitched back together by silence alone. The hour passed too quickly. When it was time to leave, Ethan held Luma's face between his palms. "Will I see you again?" Nolan stepped forward. "Every Saturday," he said. Ethan nodded, hard, like a vow. Luma did not look back as Nolan led her from the room. She did not need to. She knew. That night, back in the apartment, Luma did something she had never done before. She climbed onto the couch, curled against the cushions, and slept. Not the light, twitching sleep of a waiting animal, but the deep, heavy sleep of a heart finally set down. Nolan stood there longer than he meant to. At 3:17 the next day, Luma did not go to the window. She went to Nolan and placed her head on his knee. Spring tried to arrive in Cedar Ridge, but winter was slow to release its grip. The snow along Maple Street receded only in narrow channels, revealing patches of wet asphalt that reflected the mountains like broken mirrors. Mornings came with pale sunlight, afternoons with wind that still cut through wool and bone. The town learned to live between seasons, not winter, not yet spring, a place of waiting. For Nolan Hayes, waiting had taken on a new shape. Every Saturday, without exception, he drove Luma to the Child Services Center on Birch Avenue. The drive took 17 minutes when the roads were clear, 25 when the meltwater froze again by morning. Luma learned the route quickly. She rose when Nolan reached for his keys. She waited at the door when he pulled on his boots. She did not pace or whine. She simply stood, alert, her body aligned with the future. The building was always warm inside, the air faintly scented with lemon cleaner and old paper. Janine Caldwell, the social worker, greeted them each week with the same steady smile, careful, composed, dark hair tied at the nape of her neck, the look of a woman who had learned to hold other people's stories without breaking under them. She kept her voice calm, her steps slow, her presence a kind of bridge between fear and hope. Ethan Parker waited in the visitation room. He was still thin, still wearing hoodies too large for his shoulders, but something in his posture had shifted. He no longer curled inward when he sat. He looked at the door now. He waited. Their reunions never became loud. There was no barking, no leaping, no chaos. Luma walked to him, and pressed her forehead to his chest. Ethan wrapped his arms around her and rested his chin on her head. They stayed that way for a long time, as if neither wanted to test whether the moment was real. After a few weeks, Ethan began to speak more. At first it was just fragments, then whole sentences, then entire memories. He told Nolan about the night he left. His mother's boyfriend had come home drunk. The shouting had started in the kitchen. A plate broke. Ethan hid in his room with Luma. He put her in the backpack because it was the only thing he had. He wrote the note because his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He chose the bus stop because it was the last place in town that always had people. "I thought," Ethan said quietly one afternoon, "if I leave her where the world still passes by, someone kind will see her." Nolan nodded. "You were right." The child services process moved slowly, as it always did. Evaluations, therapy, court dates that never seemed to end. Ethan's foster placement held steady. A quiet couple named Robert and Elaine Morris, both in their late 50s, who lived on the edge of town in a small yellow house with a vegetable garden and a view of the river. Robert had been a mechanic. Elaine taught second grade. They spoke gently, laughed rarely, and gave Ethan space without letting him drift away. With each week, Ethan slept better. Janine reported that he had stopped biting his nails. He had begun drawing again, pictures of mountains, of buses, of a small dog sitting at a window with the sun behind her. And Luma changed too. She no longer slept in the backpack. She slept on the rug near Nolan's bed, sometimes venturing onto the couch when the evenings grew cold. She followed Nolan from room to room, not close enough to crowd him, not far enough to lose him. Her eyes softened, her breathing deepened. The discipline of waiting had transformed into the practice of staying. By late April, Janine called Nolan with news. "Ethan's adoption hearing is scheduled," she said. "There's a family in Wenatchee, 2 children, fenced yard, stable home." Nolan closed his eyes. The word adoption carried weight. It meant safety. It meant permanence. It also meant uncertainty. "Does Ethan know?" he asked. "Not yet. We wanted to speak with you first." They told Ethan together the following Saturday. Ethan listened without moving. When Janine finished, he nodded. He did not cry. "Will I still see Luma?" he asked. Janine hesitated. "That will depend on the family, but we'll do our best." The days that followed felt heavier. Luma sensed it. She began sleeping near the front door again, though she did not return to the backpack. Nolan found her there at night, her body aligned with the threshold, as if guarding the space between what had been and what might be. 2 weeks later, Nolan drove east with Luma in the back seat, her blanket folded neatly beneath her, her head resting against the window. The mountains thinned into open land. Snow faded into fields of wet grass and pale sky. Wenatchee appeared in the distance, quiet and ordinary and waiting. The house stood at the end of a small cul-de-sac, cream-colored siding, green shutters, a wooden fence enclosing a modest yard. A man waited on the porch, David Reynolds, early 40s, tall and broad, work-worn hands, the posture of someone who had carried responsibility for a long time. Behind him, his wife Megan, late 30s, soft brown hair tied back, eyes bright with worry and hope. 2 children hovered near the door, Caleb, 9, freckles and restless energy, and Lucy, 7, serious, observant, her arms wrapped around a gray cat with half-closed eyes named Juniper. Ethan stepped from the car. For a moment he simply stood there, absorbing the shape of the place. Then he walked forward. Luma followed him. She did not run, she did not hesitate. She walked to Ethan's side and sat. David and Megan exchanged a look. Inside, they talked. Nolan explained the story: the bus stop, the backpack, the waiting, the weeks of visits, the promise of Saturdays. Megan's eyes filled. "We weren't sure about a dog," she admitted, "especially one with history." David knelt to Luma's level. Luma held still, her gaze steady, her tail moving once against the floor. David reached out, then stopped. "May I?" Nolan nodded. David's hand touched Luma's head. She did not flinch. "She's not afraid," Lucy whispered. "No," Nolan said. "She's chosen." The family stepped aside to talk privately. Ethan sat on the floor with Luma, one arm around her neck, his face buried in her fur. Nolan watched from the doorway, the house bright with afternoon light, Juniper's tail flicking slowly against Lucy's shoulder. David and Megan returned. "We can't take on full responsibility for her," David said carefully. "But we don't want to break what they have. If you're willing to keep her, and if visits are regular and supervised at first, we agree." Ethan looked up, disbelief and relief crossing his face at the same time. Nolan nodded. "I'll bring her, as often as he wants." That evening, Luma ran in the yard, not the frantic running of fear, the open, circling joy of memory returning. The apartment felt larger, quieter. He placed the backpack on the shelf above the coat hooks, not as a monument to pain, but as proof that even the smallest acts of love could survive the coldest storms. Outside, spring finally pressed through the snow. Inside, something long frozen had learned how to grow. Summer did not arrive all at once in Cedar Ridge. It came in pieces. The snow retreated from the edges of the sidewalks like a long, reluctant confession. The mountains lost their white crowns and revealed dark pine and stone. Streams that had been frozen solid began to murmur again, uncertain at first, then louder, until the valley remembered how to move. For Nolan Hayes, the seasons no longer mattered the way they once had. Time was measured now in Saturdays. Every Saturday morning he rose before the sun, fed Luma, brushed her coat until it shone, fastened the leash she never needed but wore anyway, and drove the winding road east toward Wenatchee. The drive became a ritual. Same coffee in the cup holder, same music low on the radio, same quiet understanding in the back seat as Luma rested her chin on the door, watching the world unfold. She had grown stronger. Her ribs no longer showed. The scars on her paws had faded to pale lines beneath the fur. She walked with confidence now, her head level, her gaze steady, as though she had learned that the earth beneath her would not vanish if she trusted it. Ethan waited on the porch every time. Sometimes he had his shoes on already. Sometimes he stood barefoot on the boards, jacket forgotten, eyes fixed on the bend in the road. When Nolan's truck appeared, Ethan's face lit like a window in the dark. Luma never barked. She never needed to. She leapt from the truck before Nolan even turned off the engine, ran straight into Ethan's arms, and stayed there as if the week between them had never existed. The Reynolds family grew used to the rhythm of it. David often stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the reunion with something like awe. Megan brought water for Luma, tea for Nolan. Caleb chased Luma around the yard until both collapsed laughing. Lucy sat on the porch with Juniper, the gray cat, who regarded the dog with dignified indifference, as though he had personally approved this arrangement. Inside the house, Ethan's room began to change. At first, it had been bare. Now, it held drawings of mountains, of buses, of a German shepherd sitting at a window with the sun behind her. A photo of him and Luma on the day of their first reunion was taped above his desk. Another, taken in the yard, showed Luma on her back in the grass, legs in the air, Ethan laughing beside her. Janine reported steady progress. Ethan slept through the night. He stopped waking from nightmares. He started answering questions in class. Luma, too, transformed. She no longer checked the window at 3:17. She no longer slept near the door. At Nolan's apartment, she claimed the corner of the couch as her own, curling into the cushions with the confidence of someone who had earned the right to rest. She followed Nolan on evening walks, greeting neighbors with quiet dignity, accepting their hands without fear. But memory did not vanish entirely. Sometimes Nolan found her lying beside the old backpack on the shelf, her nose touching the fabric, her eyes half closed, not waiting, just remembering. In late August, the call came. Ethan's adoption was finalized. The Reynolds family gathered in the courthouse, their clothes pressed, their hands trembling. Ethan stood between David and Megan, his shoulders squared, his eyes bright with something close to disbelief. When the judge smiled and spoke the words that sealed it, Ethan exhaled, a breath he had been holding for years. That afternoon, Nolan drove Luma to Wenatchee. Ethan met them at the gate. He did not cry. He smiled. He hugged Luma. He hugged Nolan, too. That day they ran in the yard until the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the grass. Luma circled the fence, then the swing set, then the old oak tree, her legs strong beneath her, her spirit finally unburdened. As dusk fell, Nolan knelt beside Ethan. "She'll stay with me," he said. "But she's yours, too, every weekend, every holiday, whenever you need her." Ethan nodded. "I know." When Nolan left that evening, the truck felt too quiet. Back in Cedar Ridge, the apartment seemed larger, emptier, yet full of something new. Luma did not go to the door. She climbed onto the couch and slept. Weeks passed, then months. Autumn painted the mountains gold and rust. Winter's edge returned in frost and silence. Through it all, Saturdays remained. Then, in early December, Janine called again. "There's been a change," she said carefully. "The Reynolds family is relocating to Spokane, David's work. They leave in 3 weeks." Nolan closed his eyes. "Ethan's handling it," Janine continued, "but he's afraid of losing Luma again." That night, Nolan sat on the floor beside Luma, running his hand through her fur. "They're moving," he said, "but they're not leaving you." Luma lifted her head, ears tilting, listening as if she understood every word. The final Saturday before the move came cold and bright. At the Reynolds house, boxes lined the walls. The yard stood empty of toys. The swing hung still. Ethan knelt in front of Luma, pressing his forehead to hers. "Promise you'll come." Nolan knelt too. "We will." David stepped forward. "We'll drive back when we can. Summers, holidays." Megan's eyes shone. "She belongs in both your lives." Luma looked between them all. Her tail thumped once. Then she leaned into Nolan's chest, calm, certain. On the drive home, she watched the road quietly, not with longing, with peace. That night, Nolan placed the backpack on the shelf beside her bed. Luma sniffed it once, then curled against the couch and slept. Not the sleep of waiting, the sleep of belonging. Winter returned to Cedar Ridge the way old grief sometimes does, quietly, without warning, and less cruel than before. The first snow of the season fell in long, deliberate spirals, settling on the rooftops and pine branches, softening the edges of the world. Nolan Hayes stood at his apartment window and watched the streetlights blur behind the flakes. The town looked the same as the night he had found Luma at the bus stop, but it no longer felt the same. Nothing did. Luma lay on the couch behind him, curled into the corner cushion, one paw resting against the old backpack that Nolan had never put away. The bag no longer belonged to fear. It had become a memory kept close, the way people keep letters long after the words have healed. The phone rang. Nolan answered on the second ring. Hayes. It was Janine Caldwell. Her voice carried the careful gentleness Nolan had come to recognize. "They've arrived in Spokane," she said. "The Reynolds family." The move went smoothly. "Ethan's doing all right. He asked if you were okay." Nolan closed his eyes. "Tell him we're fine." There was a pause. "He also asked if Luma remembered the backyard with the oak tree." Nolan glanced at Luma. She lifted her head at the sound of her name, ears tilting. "She does," he said. "She always will." Janine exhaled. "They'll come down for Christmas if the weather holds." After the call, Nolan brewed coffee and carried his mug to the couch. Luma shifted to make room, her head resting against his knee. Outside, snow whispered its way across the glass. Weeks passed. Winter was not the enemy it once had been. Nolan and Luma fell into a rhythm that felt older than habit. Morning walks through the quiet streets, steam from breath and coffee mingling in the cold, evenings with the radio low and the lamp warm. Luma learned the neighbors' names, accepted their hands, and kept her distance from the children until she decided they were safe. She moved through the town with the steady dignity of a creature who had survived something and chosen to stay open anyway. One night, Nolan dreamed of the bus stop. In the dream, the bench was empty, the lamp steady, the road clear. He woke before dawn and realized he had not thought about 317 in months. On December 23rd, the truck headlights cut through fresh snow as Nolan and Luma left Cedar Ridge before sunrise. The drive east was slow but peaceful, the mountains glowing pale blue in the early light. Luma rode in the back seat, wrapped in her blanket, her nose tracing the air as if following something familiar across the miles. Spokane greeted them with quiet streets and a thin winter sun. The Reynolds' new house stood at the edge of a small cul-de-sac, its windows glowing, a wreath on the door, a cardboard snowman leaning against the fence. David opened the door before Nolan knocked, his smile broad and genuine. "Come in," he said. "He's been waiting since dawn." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and pine. Megan emerged from the kitchen, flour on her cheek, wiping her hands on a towel. Caleb and Lucy hovered on the stairs, whispering, while Juniper, the gray cat, observed the scene from the back of the couch with superior calm. And then Ethan appeared. He was taller. His hair had been cut properly. The shadows beneath his eyes had faded. But when he saw Luma, the same breath caught in his throat, the same boy flickered behind the new steadiness. "Hey," he said. Luma did not bark. She walked to him, placed her forehead against his chest, and breathed him in. Ethan knelt, his arms wrapped around her. "You came." Nolan stood back, hands in his pockets, and let the moment take all the space it needed. They spent the morning in the yard. Snow clung to the oak tree branches like stars. Luma ran until her sides heaved, then returned to Ethan's side, content to sit while he spoke about school, about a science project, about the way Spokane's snow was different, drier, brighter, not as heavy as Cedar Ridge's storms. Later, inside, they drank cocoa with too many marshmallows. Megan hung the last ornament on the tree. David snapped a photograph. Ethan on the floor, Luma curled against his chest, the firelight behind them, Juniper's tail flicking into the frame. That night, Nolan drove back alone. The road was long, the snow steady. The passenger seat felt empty, but not in the way it once would have. There was a difference between loneliness and space. Nolan had learned it now. When he reached his apartment, the silence was soft. He placed his coat on the hook, poured a glass of water, and sat on the edge of the couch. The old backpack waited on the shelf. He did not touch it. Christmas passed, then New Year's. Winter deepened. In February, Ethan called Nolan himself for the first time. "I wanted to tell you," he said, his voice stronger than before. "I made the basketball team. I still sleep sometimes with the photo of me and Luma by my bed. Is she okay?" Nolan smiled. "She's good. She says hello." He put the phone on speaker. Luma lifted her head, ears forward. Ethan laughed on the other end. Spring arrived the way it always does, quietly, inevitably. Snow receded from the roads. The river broke its ice. Cedar Ridge exhaled. In April, the Reynolds family drove down for the weekend. Ethan stepped from the car and Luma bounded toward him, her joy full and unguarded. They walked the old streets together. Nolan showed them the bus stop on Maple Street. The bench had been replaced. The lamp burned steady. Ethan stood there for a moment. "This is where I left her," he said. Nolan nodded. "This is where she was found." Ethan knelt, brushed snowmelt from the bench, and set the old backpack there for a second, then lifted it, shouldering it as he used to, smiling at the memory without fear. They returned to Nolan's apartment, coffee on the stove, the radio low. Luma lay on the rug between them, her eyes half closed, her breathing slow. That evening, as the Reynolds family prepared to leave, Ethan pulled Nolan aside. "She belongs with you," he said, "but she belongs with me, too." Nolan met his eyes. "That's the truth." They hugged, awkward at first, then real. When the car pulled away, Luma watched until it disappeared, then turned and walked back inside. She did not go to the door. She did not seek the backpack. She climbed onto the couch and slept. Weeks later, Nolan hung the photograph David had taken on the wall above the desk, Ethan laughing in the snow, Luma curled against him, the fire behind them. They were not looking at the camera. They were looking at each other. On certain afternoons, Nolan still glanced at his watch around 3:17. Old habits are stubborn. But the window no longer held him. The past no longer commanded the room. One evening in early summer, Nolan and Luma walked along Maple Street. The mountains were green. The air smelled of rain and pine. They paused at the bus stop. Nolan set his hand on the bench. "This is where it started." Luma sat beside him, her shoulder touching his knee. The wind moved through the trees. The road lay open. Waiting had ended. What remained was staying. Sometimes God does not send angels with wings. Sometimes he sends them with muddy paws, tired eyes, and a heart that refuses to give up. This story reminds us that miracles do not always arrive as lightning from the sky. They arrive as small choices, a boy choosing love over safety, a dog choosing faith over fear, a man choosing to stay when it would have been easier to walk away. In our daily lives, we all face winters of our own, moments when the road is empty, when the promise feels broken, when the world is cold and we are tempted to stop believing, but God is still working, even in the quiet, even in the waiting, even when we cannot see the ending yet. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what part moved you the most. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue spreading stories of faith, love, and second chances. May God bless you and your family. May He protect your home and your heart. And if you believe in His miracles like this one, type Amen in the comments.